Some dogs bark at ghosts, others bark at thunder. But what if a dog barked because something, someone, was still alive beneath your feet? In a misty town at the edge of the Smoky Mountains, a reclusive deputy and his retired K9 uncover a secret buried beneath a forgotten barn. It begins with a whisper in the dirt, a knock in the night, and a dog that simply wouldn't give up. Would you have heard what the ground was trying to say? Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Mornings in Townsend, Tennessee didn't rise. They unfolded. Fog crept over the meadows like a cautious hand, brushing against the rusted wire fences and dew-slicked grass with the patience of something ancient. From the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, the wind carried with it the scent of pine bark and something older, something forgotten, woven into the land's breath. It wrapped around barns with bowed backs and corrugated metal roofs that remembered storms better than names. Deputy Caleb Whitaker woke before the sun. He always did. Not out of discipline, but out of something quieter. A need to be awake before the world could ask him to answer for anything. He sat at the small table by the window in his rented home near the little river, coffee in a dented thermos lid, cooling beside a folder he hadn't opened in weeks. Outside, a woodpecker tapped against the tin roof like it was searching for a hollow to call home. His German shepherd, Rook, lay curled in the corner like a shadow with breath. 7 years old, retired from service after a handler in Mississippi said he was too reactive to thunder and deep bass frequencies. But Caleb hadn't seen reactivity. He'd seen focus so intense it was almost unsettling. Rook didn't bark at storms. He listened to them. Not with fear, more like anticipation, as if he expected something to be hiding in the rumble. Rook had taken to watching the barn across the field lately. Lark Hollow Barn, a place too old to be useful and too stubborn to fall. It belonged now to the Townsend Farmers Cooperative. Technically, but nobody used it. Not since the renovation grant was awarded and quietly forgotten. Boards were replaced. A new lock had been added. But no one ever saw who came or went. Caleb didn't ask questions. Not anymore. Not since the call last October that led him to dismiss a report from an old woman wandering along the edge of the Foothills Parkway. She said she heard a child crying in the trees. He wrote it off as confusion, until they found her 2 days later, hypothermic and lost. She didn't speak to him. She only looked past him, and he never forgot that. Since then, his world had grown quieter, more cautious, more deliberate. Every step had to be earned now, every assumption rechecked. Rook's ears perked. The dog rose slowly, shoulders stiff, posture low. His gaze fixed not on Caleb but past him, through the window, toward the barn. The fog was beginning to thin, revealing the dark slats of the barn like ribs through a torn shirt. Then came the sound. Not loud, not human, not even animal. A click, maybe. A tremor in the boards. Caleb didn't hear it. Rook did. And he stood, stiff and still as stone, the fur between his shoulders rising like a wave. No growl, no bark, just stillness, the kind that made everything else feel wrong for continuing. Caleb set down his thermos, stood. He watched the barn now, too, and for a moment, nothing moved. But Rook did. He walked to the door and sat. Not facing Caleb, facing the wind, listening. There was a kind of communication between them that didn't rely on commands. It never had. When Caleb first brought Rook home from the shelter, a favor called in by a friend in Chattanooga, he was told the dog had trouble adjusting. Sensitive. hyper-vigilant, possibly neurotic. What he found instead was a creature more attuned to absence than presence. Rook didn't react to what was there. He reacted to what was missing. That morning, after a silence stretched too long to ignore, Caleb reached down and scratched behind the dog's ear. Rook flinched, not at the touch, but at the sound of a train whistle echoing across the foothills, faint and far, too early for the freight schedule. Caleb turned back toward the barn. It had once held hay and cattle, back when Townsend was full of farmhands and hard winters. Now it held stories nobody told out loud. Paint peeled down its sides in long strips like bandages pulled from old wounds. The newer planks, brighter, tighter grained, didn't match the structure's age. They stood out. So did the door hinges. Too clean, too unused. He didn't move toward it. Not yet. Instead, he walked back inside, opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, and pulled out a folder he'd tucked away after the last snow. Inside were 3 photos, all grainy, all from the edge of that barn, taken at different hours on different days. Each one showed the same white van, no license plate visible, no driver identified, no report filed, just noted and left alone. Rook whined once, just a breath. But it carried weight. There's a kind of stillness that precedes change, a pause, the moment when instinct overtakes routine, and the body knows before the mind dares to admit it. That morning, Deputy Caleb Whitaker didn't eat breakfast. He didn't open his emails. He walked out onto the porch, let the screen door bang gently behind him, and stood beside a dog who had learned to listen long before the rest of the world did. The wind shifted. Rook tilted his head toward the barn. Caleb followed his gaze, and the quiet began to ache. That night, the rain came in sideways. Not a storm that howled, but one that whispered, an unrelenting hiss that slithered across window panes and down drain pipes like it was looking for a way inside. The kind of rain that didn't shout danger, but hid it. Caleb sat on the floor at his wood-burning stove, flipping through weather reports and traffic updates on an old tablet that couldn't hold a charge without the cord twisted just right. Rook lay stretched along the edge of the rug, unmoving, but alert in that way dogs are when they pretend to sleep and hear everything. The clock read 2:07 a.m. when the alert came in, not from dispatch, not from the county, but from an anonymous number that had never pinged his phone before. One line. Simple. Uneven spacing like it had been typed in the dark. The ground remembers. Listen to your dog. Caleb read it twice. Then again. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a warning. It felt more like a reminder. And Rook was already on his feet, ears flat, tail still, body angled toward the front door like he'd heard something Caleb hadn't. Maybe felt something. He grabbed his coat. The rain met him with a wet slap to the face, cold and immediate. He didn't bother starting the cruiser. There'd be too much noise, too much light. The barn wasn't far. Maybe a 6-minute walk through mud, through memory. Rook trotted just ahead, glancing back every few steps like he needed Caleb to keep up, not just physically but mentally, to stay open to what they might find. The Lark Hollow barn looked different at night, less like a structure, more like a silhouette of one, hollow-eyed, broad-shouldered, draped in darkness. The newer slats on its frame caught the occasional flash of distant lightning and gleamed faintly, like teeth behind a smile. Caleb approached slow, boots heavy in the mud. The rain soaked his collar, slid down his neck, pooled at his wrists. Then Rook stopped. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He placed his front paws flat against the wooden threshold and pressed down, nose low, tail locked in line with his spine. His breathing was shallow, deliberate. He began to paw, slowly, rhythmically, at a warped plank just to the left of the entrance, a spot half covered in wet leaves and old sawdust. Caleb squatted beside him, brushed the debris away, and found that the board was slightly raised, as if the dirt beneath had shifted or something had recently been moved. A faint scent rose, not quite chemical, but artificial. Wood cleaner? Bleach? Something trying too hard to erase something else. Caleb didn't have his crowbar. Didn't need it. The edge of his knife slipped easily beneath the lip of the plank, but before he could lift, Rook froze, muscles tightening, gaze fixed outward. Caleb followed the stare, and then he heard it. Distant, low, a sound that didn't belong to rain or wind or wild things. The long, mournful blow of a train horn, not scheduled, not expected, and not coming from the direction of the main line. Caleb stood slowly, heart thudding in his chest, not from fear, but recognition. That wasn't a train he could explain. It came from the east, through forest that hadn't hosted active tracks in years, maybe decades. Still, the sound was real. And when it faded, the silence it left behind was more deafening than thunder. Then came the bark. Rook exploded into motion, loud, sharp, guttural, a single jarring sound that echoed off the barn walls and into Caleb's spine like a shout from a place that had gone unheard for too long. It wasn't random. It wasn't fear. It was signal. A call. Or maybe a reply. Caleb stepped back from the threshold, breath fogging in the rain-heavy air. He looked at the plank again, at the dog, at the barn. There was something beneath, not metaphorically, literally. Something in the earth. Something that made the bones of this place hum with memory. Something old and ugly that had been buried, not forgotten. And his dog had heard it. Back home, Caleb dried Rook off with a faded flannel towel, neither of them speaking. One because he couldn't, the other because there was nothing yet to say. The text message stayed on the phone screen beside the coffee pot. Caleb looked at it again. The ground remembers. Listen to your dog. And he had. But listening and understanding weren't the same thing. Not yet. Outside, the rain kept falling, and somewhere beneath the soaked earth, something else waited, breathless, buried, not yet done. The next morning arrived like an apology pool. The storm had moved east, leaving behind a trail of broken clouds and a low-hanging mist that curled across the meadows like breath on glass. Sunlight tried and failed to pierce through the gauze of it. Everything looked quieter than it should have. Even the wind had forgotten how to speak. Deputy Caleb Whitaker sat at his desk inside the Blount County Sheriff's substation, second cup of coffee gone cold, eyes fixed on the same sentence that hadn't stopped echoing since 2:07 a.m. The ground remembers. Listen to your dog. He replayed the moment Rook barked, the way the barn plank shifted slightly beneath his boot, the scent of bleach seeping through the damp air. But none of it meant anything on paper. Suspicion without evidence was just noise, and Caleb had made enough noise in his life. The wrong kind. He pulled a folder from the bottom drawer. The building permit log. Not digital. He didn't trust the new system. Too many missing fields, too easy to scrub. The physical book held more truth than any database could. He thumbed through pages until he found it. Townsend Farmers Cooperative, Lark Hollow Barn, Foundation Reinforcement. Approved, May 18th. What stood out wasn't what was there, but what wasn't. No completion report, no inspection signature. Just a stamped approval and a blank line where a second visit should have been logged. His finger hovered over the name. Delia Crane, County Inspector. Efficient, quiet, never questioned. He'd seen her once in passing, clipboard in one hand, hard hat in the other, walking the site of a burned-out dry goods store. She'd approved the rebuild in record time. No one had questioned that either. But this was different. This wasn't about structural integrity. This was about intent. Caleb set the file aside and turned to Rook, who had been sitting at the window all morning, staring. Not at the barn this time, but at Caleb himself, like he was waiting for him to catch up. "You still smell it, don't you?" Caleb muttered under his breath. Rook didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. The moment called for subtlety. A direct approach to the cooperative would raise flags, especially if he was wrong. So he took another route. Mary from the clerk's office, who kept better records than the official system ever would. He drove the short stretch to the town hall, where the walls still smelled faintly of lemon polish and old tobacco, and asked to see who co-signed the barn improvement funds. Mary, in her usual floral cardigan and orthopedic sneakers, handed him a manila folder with one eyebrow raised. "Why?" she asked, half curious, half bored. "Just tying up loose ends," he replied. Inside the file was a single-page agreement. The second name made his mouth go dry. Evelyn Pike, Director of Smoky Hands Foundation, beloved face of charity drives, grant programs, and weekly food donations. The signature curled at the edges, like it had been written in a rush. Evelyn wasn't just a co-signer. She was listed as co-owner of the storage facility next to the barn. Storage, he thought. That's what the cooperative called the space. Not a shelter, not a garage, not even a supply room. Storage. The word felt wrong now, hollow and misused. Rook pressed his snout against the window, then turned toward the door. Something else was bothering him. Back at the house, Caleb pulled off his boots and checked the soles. Faint traces of oil-based residue clung to the treads. Not from his cruiser, not from the station. And it wasn't there yesterday. Rook sniffed the boots and immediately circled back to the door. He wasn't reacting to a smell from the house. He was tracking something brought back from the barn. Caleb grabbed a cotton swab and gently dabbed the residue from the rubber sole, then dropped it into a sample bag, labeled it, and logged it without sending it to the lab. Not yet. He didn't trust it in the system, not with Evelyn Pike's name on the paperwork. The connections weren't solid, not yet. But they were there, faint as veins beneath skin. The uninspected renovations, the shared ownership, the misnamed facility, the dog's behavior, the anonymous text, and now the chemical trace on his own boots. Still, it was Rook who told him what mattered most. The dog wouldn't let the boots alone. He pawed at them, sat beside them, growled low and constant until Caleb picked them up. And then, only then, did Rook step back and stare again at the barn from the window. Not with fear, not with anger, with something closer to grief, like he knew something had already happened and was still happening. Caleb took out his notebook. On the last page, he scribbled a line in shaky pen. Some things don't go away when buried. They wait. And this time, he wouldn't wait with them. By Friday, the skies had cleared, but the ground remained saturated, mud thick and sticky enough to pull the sole off a boot if you weren't careful. Caleb parked his cruiser just short of the Lark Hollow barn, not directly in front. He didn't want the neighbors asking questions. Not yet. The barn loomed ahead in the silver morning light, its silhouette darker now in Caleb's mind, no longer just a relic of the past, but a container of questions he could no longer leave closed. He hadn't come alone. Riding in the back seat, quietly flipping through a clipboard and muttering to himself, was Fire Marshal Roy Darby, a big man in a gray coat who carried his authority like a scuffed badge, used but not dulled. He wasn't part of the sheriff's department, which was exactly why Caleb brought him. Just structural, Caleb had said earlier that morning. Might be water damage in the foundation or unstable flooring. I need a second pair of eyes. Quiet ones. Darby had nodded. No questions. The kind of man who understood when silence meant more. Rook stayed up front, tense, ears flicking back and forth like antennae. The moment Caleb stepped out and let the dog down, Rook didn't bolt. He moved slowly, like he was measuring the earth itself. Each paw pressed gently but firmly into the soft soil. He didn't sniff the air. He read it. The barn door groaned open on tired hinges. Inside, the light was dim and flat. Strips of dust hung like curtains in the air, and a faint scent of mildew competed with something sharper. Metallic, artificial, hard to place. Caleb stepped inside first. Darby followed, boots thudding solid against the wooden planks. Rook waited at the threshold, unmoving. Caleb turned. Come. But Rook didn't move. Instead, he lowered himself, belly to floor, nose just inches above the threshold, and began to sniff in tight, controlled patterns. First left, then right, then center. A minute passed, then 2. Finally, he rose, walked 10 paces in, turned a slow circle, and stopped over a spot near the northeast wall. There, Caleb said. Mark it. Darby knelt, ran a gloved hand over the floorboards. Feel that? He muttered. The give? Caleb knelt beside him. The wood here felt newer, different grain, less wear, a subtle curve upward like it had been installed in a hurry without letting it settle. He tapped it gently. The sound didn't echo, but it wasn't solid either. Hollow underneath, Darby said. No crawl space in the blueprints. No, Caleb confirmed. There isn't. They peeled back 2 loose boards. Beneath was compacted dirt, disturbed, darker than the soil around it. Caleb dug a finger in and lifted a pinch. Not mud, not natural. It smelled faintly of sulfur and bleach. Why bleach? Darby asked under his breath. To hide something, Caleb answered. Or try to. Rook stood beside them, motionless. His ears twitched once as Caleb reached deeper into the disturbed soil, and his paw shot out, gently but firmly pressing Caleb's forearm. Stop? Caleb asked. The dog didn't move. The silence in the barn shifted then, not louder, heavier. The dust in the air stopped swirling. Caleb stood and wiped his hands on his jeans. We're not digging today, he said, almost to himself. Darby looked confused. Then what are we? But Caleb was already walking, eyes scanning the walls, the ceiling beams, the floorboards. He was looking for something misplaced. Not wrong, not broken, just off. There, near the southeast corner. A vertical board slightly brighter than its neighbors, its nail heads cleaner. He pressed against it. It creaked, not outward, but inward. "Help me!" Together, they pried the board loose. Behind it was a cavity the size of a storage locker. Inside, a rusted folding chair, a coiled extension cord, and a discarded medical mask, half wrapped in plastic. And just above them, dangling from a bent nail, a battered bicycle bell, bent and flecked with green paint, like it had once belonged to a child who rode too fast through spring grass. Neither man spoke. Rook sat down quietly, staring at the bell. He let out a low whine, barely audible. And that's when Caleb felt it, that familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came not with fear, but recognition. Something about the chair, the plastic, the bell, it fit, like pieces from different puzzles forced into alignment by a hand that didn't care if they matched. Darby broke the silence. "You want me to file a report?" Caleb shook his head. "Not yet." "You gonna tell the co-op?" Caleb turned toward him, expression unreadable. "No, but I'm gonna tell her." Darby didn't have to ask who. As they stepped outside, the air felt colder, though the sun had climbed higher. Behind them, the barn creaked once like it was settling. But Rook didn't look back. He stared out toward the field beyond, his eyes tracking something no one else could see. That's when Caleb knew. This wasn't just about a hidden room. It wasn't just about the barn. It was about who had been there and who was still missing. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He didn't try to. He sat in the worn armchair by the front window, cup of coffee gone cold beside him, a single bulb casting a soft yellow glow across a desk stacked with maps, license logs, and zoning paperwork. Rook lay curled at the window's base, still and alert, his eyes following every shadow that passed across the porch. Outside, Little River flowed steady and low, catching the last drift of moonlight on its surface. Caleb's pen moved silently over a notepad as he made connections the department hadn't been willing to make months ago. Connections he had ignored because they were too thin to prove, too heavy to carry. 3 things wouldn't leave him alone. The smell of bleach in soil that should have held nothing but pine rot and barn dust. The bicycle bell, green paint chipped, child's, hanging in a place no child had likely stood in years, and Rook's unrelenting stillness when they stood in that barn, like something in the earth was waiting to speak, and he didn't want to miss it. At 6:15 a.m. he dialed Trooper Lila Mendez. She answered on the second ring. "I need your help," Caleb said, his voice low and direct. "I need you to pull traffic footage from the 321 bypass near Townsend, past 3 Thursdays. Focus on any commercial vehicles leaving the co-op barn between midnight and 4. "You expecting deliveries?" Mendez asked. "No, I'm expecting ghosts with license plates." By 9:30, Mendez was in his living room with a USB drive, and Rook was pacing again, always 3 steps from the kitchen to the back door, pausing at each turn as if measuring some invisible perimeter. Caleb plugged in the drive, pulled up the footage. Grainy, gray-black timestamps. Nothing for the first hour. Then, a white panel truck, no markings, passing slowly just before 2:00 a.m. Thursday morning. Next file. Same truck, different plate. Next Thursday. Truck again. Same model. Slightly different dent on the rear left panel. Mendez leaned forward. "Rotating tags?" Caleb nodded. And rotating trucks, but same destination. Where to? Caleb pulled up another map, this one already marked with red ink. Maryville Industrial Park. Each of those trucks disappears there. No exit footage, no re-entry logs. You think they're being offloaded? I think they're being unburdened. Mendez narrowed her eyes. What's in the trucks? Caleb didn't answer. He opened a file folder, pulled out a faded pamphlet stamped with the emblem of Smoky Hands Charitable Foundation. On the back, a small route map highlighted in purple. You see this? He asked. They're donation pickups, purple route. Every Thursday, same time the truck rolls out. Mendez drew a long breath. You think they're moving people, not clothes? Caleb stood. I think they're moving things no one's allowed to ask about. And I think the barn isn't the only stop. That afternoon, Caleb drove out to the only place left in town that never upgraded to digital surveillance. The repair shop owned by Mr. Amos Carter, a 67-year-old whose hearing was razor sharp when it came to mechanical noise but politely inconsistent with everything else. The place smelled of gasoline, rainwater, and old leather. Caleb knocked on the side door. It opened with a slow creak. Deputy Whitaker, Amos said, not looking up from the carburetor on his bench. Was wondering when you'd come by. I heard that damn dog of yours 2 nights back. Same direction. Same pitch. You hear it often? In the rain, always clearer. Echoes more. The way it bounces off the old rail lines, it carries. But lately, it ain't the dog. It's something else. Like what? Amos stood, wiped his hands, and looked Caleb straight in the eye. Like a thudding, not thunder, not tires, a hollow thump, 3 beats, paused, then again. Every Thursday? Almost like clockwork, when the clouds come low. And you didn't say anything? Amos shrugged. Folks say they hear things in the mountains all the time. Ghost trains, coyote howls that sound like crying. I hear things. But yours was different. How? Amos pointed toward the hills. Whatever you're chasing, it ain't done moving. Later that evening, back at his desk, Caleb marked Amos's location on the map, drew a line from Lark Hollow to Maryville, passing through the town's old storm tunnels, an access route forgotten by most, but still structurally intact. Rook whined softly and placed his paw on the corner of the map, right over the shaded area labeled Foothills Transfer Road, closed to public access since 1998. That night, Caleb called in a favor, one that didn't go through official channels. He dialed Agent Henry Cole with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. No greetings, just the facts. I need EZ Pass data, 3 Thursdays, all unmarked commercial tags passing through Foothills Parkway between midnight and 4. Dump it straight to me. No record, no loopbacks. Why you? Because everyone else is too close to the co-op. There was a long pause. You're chasing shadows, Caleb. No, he said quietly. I'm following echoes. Cole exhaled. Give me 6 hours. When Caleb hung up, he didn't go to bed. He just sat back, looked at the map again, and circled 3 points in red ink. Rook laid his head against Caleb's boot. His breath even, steady. Outside, the wind began to pick up. The ground hadn't forgotten, and neither had they. The morning air felt thick, like the mountains were holding their breath. A pale sun hung low behind the ridge as Caleb stood once again at the edge of Lark Hollow Barn. The old structure slumped forward, its bones of gray timber groaning under time and quiet use. The wind moved differently now, carrying less pine, more chemical trace. Beneath the planks, something waited. Rook was already tense, body low to the earth, nose flicking left to right. His ears flattened when Caleb stepped inside. Trooper Mendez arrived minutes later, followed by the fire marshal, a sharp-eyed woman named Geneva Hollis, who carried herself like she'd seen buildings lie before. No sirens, no backup. This wasn't a raid. It was a quiet reckoning. The plan was simple: non-invasive safety inspection, just enough to legally remove floorboards and check for hazardous subsurface issues. Caleb didn't need a warrant for that. Delia Crane's own permit requests had given them a narrow but usable path in. Sunlight pierced through a high crack in the barn wall, painting long beams across the dust. Geneva dropped to one knee, ran her hand across the new wooden planks, then tapped lightly with a rubber mallet. The first few knocks returned a dull thud, earth beneath. But by the fourth, the tone changed. Hollow. A pause. Then again, hollow, hollow, sharp. She looked up. Here. They pried up 3 planks, then a fourth. Below was darkness, not soil, but air. Geneva lowered a probe light into the gap, illuminating a shaft made of limestone and shale, crude steps carved along one edge. It dropped maybe 10 feet, then opened into a rough room. Dust spiraled like slow moths. The air that came up was stale, but not old. Caleb turned to Rook. The dog was trembling, not from fear, but tension, every fiber alert. He looked at the hole, then back at Caleb, then back again. Something's down there, Geneva muttered. Rook moved first, descending carefully along the jagged steps, his body low. Caleb followed, flashlight in one hand, the other brushing the stone for balance. The walls were raw, sweating with moisture. At the base, a narrow corridor opened to the right. The smell was sharper here. Bleach, copper, old detergent. Rook hesitated at the opening, sniffed, then slipped inside. The room was man-made, not old. Smooth planks reinforced the limestone walls. There was no furniture, but markings, scrapes along the floor, scuffed patches where crates had been dragged. In the far corner, a plastic bin sat overturned. Rook nosed it, then stopped. His ears twitched. Caleb approached slowly, knelt, and lifted a corner of the bin with his baton. Underneath, a small strip of cloth, pink and stiff with dried soap. He picked it up. Printed cartoon elephants barely visible. A child's pajama sleeve. He stared at it for a long time. Then he turned toward the west wall, where something glinted in the light. Hanging from a nail, crooked and lonely, was the bike bell. The same one from yesterday, only this time he saw the smear of violet paint along its base. A streak just wide enough to be a fingerprint. It didn't belong here. Not in this place. His breath caught. Mendez whispered from behind. "Is that?" He nodded. "Purple root," Caleb said softly. "Same color." Rook growled then, low and steady. Not anger, but warning. They followed the growl. Behind a false panel in the wall, barely visible, was a narrow duct framed with plywood, no wider than a man's shoulder. Caleb reached out, knocked. Once. Nothing. Twice. Still. Then a faint, hesitant reply. Knock, knock, knock. The same 3-count rhythm Amos had described. Mendez froze. "Jesus." Caleb's voice was rough. "Someone's alive in there." Geneva radioed for emergency extraction support. Mendez began mapping the duct's curve with her phone flashlight. Rook stayed glued to the panel, his body blocking the path, his ears still. A sound came from behind the wall, too soft to be speech, more like breath. Then suddenly, Caleb stood back, shoulders drawn tight, fingers twitching. This isn't a cellar. It's a transit point. Mendez frowned. Meaning? They weren't just stored here. They were passed through, staged, moved on. Where? Caleb turned, eyes blazing. Maryville. The trucks don't stop for long, but long enough. He looked again at the sleeve in his hand. The faint smell of pine crushed under soap lingered. A scent meant to comfort now reeked of containment. Mendez stepped outside to coordinate. Geneva followed to get ventilation gear. Caleb and Rook remained. The barn above them creaked once, then settled. Silence fell. Then Rook barked, a single sharp sound. From the vent behind the panel, a voice emerged. Faint, hoarse. Please. Caleb didn't move. He just closed his eyes and whispered, Hold on. We're coming. But in his mind, the pieces clicked. Smoky hands, purple route, the co-op, Thursday nights, the bells, and behind it all, one signature that had slipped through inspections, hidden in plain sight. Delia Crane, the woman who approved the floor plans, who ignored the old woman's complaint, who wrote off noises in the night as settling structure. She wasn't a bystander. She was the architect. And if she built this, there were more. By Wednesday night, Townsend had returned to its familiar hush, the kind that settles in small mountain towns before a storm, when wind presses against window panes like a forgotten memory trying to get in. Caleb Whitaker sat alone in his truck, parked behind the co-op's grain silo, just off Foothills Parkway, staring at a clipboard that held more than a plan. It held a reckoning. In the passenger seat, Rook lay with his head low but eyes sharp, a soft whine in his throat every time thunder rippled in the distance. Around his thick neck, Caleb carefully adjusted the tan canvas strap of a custom dampening harness, a soft mesh collar with noise-reducing tech built into it. Not standard issue, but made for Rook's condition. Hyperacuity to low-frequency vibration. Caleb had rigged it himself years ago. Never thought he'd need it again. The plan had to feel like routine. Delia Crane's operation, if she was indeed at the center, was like any good engineered structure. Deceptively simple, resilient under surface tension, but susceptible to internal stress. That was where Caleb intended to strike. Quietly. Precisely. No heroics, just exposure, and a locked door. Across town, Trooper Mendez waited near the East Timberline in an unmarked cruiser. She had night vision cams set on Lark Hollow Barn. A mile beyond her, Agent Cole monitored the checkpoint at Maryville Industrial Park, where the suspected white box truck often disappeared off-grid after stops at the co-op. Geneva, the fire marshal, was standing by with a safety crew hidden behind the ridge. Caleb kept it small, tight. Trust had been weaponized already in this town, misused by the very people who wore warmth like a public face. He wasn't giving them more leverage. Thursday evening came wet and strange. Mist clung to the roads like half-formed thoughts. Light rain pattered like whispers against the truck roof. Then, at 2:11 a.m., just as forecasted, the white box truck turned onto the co-op gravel drive. Headlights dimmed, taillights taped to soften glow. It backed toward the barn without a brake tap, moving like it had done this same path dozens of times before. Inside the barn, Geneva's team had hidden motion sensors beneath the new wood planks. calibrated to track weight shift and hydraulic pressure. They knew where the access lift was now, knew what it moved. Rook perked up, ears twitching. He gave a low, steady whine, followed by 3 soft puffs of breath, his signal. Caleb nodded, opened the door without a sound. He stayed low, circling through the wet fescue at the tree line. Rook followed like a shadow. Through the cracks of the barn siding, movement flickered. 2 men unloading crates labeled with crooked red paint. Donations. One man dragged a crate to the back of the barn, where the false floor opened. The other adjusted a small handheld signaler, a blunt object like a garage door remote. Then she arrived. Delia Crane, flashlight clenched in her mouth, blueprints in one hand, stepped into the barn with the poise of someone on schedule. She moved through the space like it belonged to her, issuing clipped commands. Reverse order, lift, then slide. Verify slot 1. She wasn't guessing. She was running the blueprint. Rook growled, soft and vibrating, as Caleb motioned for him to stay. Inside, the workers activated the lift. The sound was faint but unmistakable, metal against damp wood. A pressurized hiss as the platform tilted. Beneath it, the hole waited. Another transfer point. Suddenly, Delia paused. She tilted her head, frowning slightly. "Did you hear that?" One worker shook his head. But Caleb knew. The wind had shifted. The smell of gun oil and fear was in the air now. Delia lifted the signaler. Before she could press it, Caleb stepped through the side door with his badge raised and his voice cold. "That's far enough." The workers startled. One dropped his grip on the crate. The other reached for his coat. Too late. Rook surged forward, tackling him by the thigh. Not viciously, but hard enough to slam him down and away from the lift panel. Delia didn't flinch. She turned to run, but Geneva appeared at the other entrance, hand raised. "You don't want to do that." Trooper Mendez's voice crackled through a nearby comms box. "The truck's clean, 3 crates sealed, 2 with air vents." The implication landed like a hammer. Caleb advanced. Delia backed toward the lift, eyes still scanning for options. "Don't be stupid," he said. "You're not a monster, right? Just efficient." Her jaw tightened. "You think this helps anyone?" Caleb added, lower now. "What you built, what you hid." Delia's voice came soft, cold. "You don't understand the cost of visibility. I kept it quiet. I kept it manageable. You kept it buried." She stared at him, and for a heartbeat, just one, her shoulders sagged. Then Geneva cuffed her. The crates were lifted, carefully opened. Inside, no children, but signs. Recent occupancy, thermal residue, discarded items. The place had been cleared ahead of the raid, meaning someone had tipped off the route ahead. But not early enough. Evidence remained. Names could still be traced. The pattern could still be cracked. Caleb exhaled slowly as Rook pressed his head against his hip. The barn was no longer quiet. Neither was the town. They thought the storm had broken, that the crate lift, the crates, the confrontation in the barn, was the moment of revelation. But Townsend, like the Smokies it curled against, didn't give up its truths all at once. Some were tucked beneath layers of silence, under paper and pavement, whispered instead of spoken, so familiar they became invisible. The morning after the raid broke thick and gray. Fog curled through the town square like breath from something buried. Caleb sat at his kitchen table, flipping through the inspection documents Delia Crane had signed over the last 18 months. Permits, diagrams, load-bearing approvals, architectural notations too detailed for a woman in her position to have generated a loan. Everyone cross-referenced, every one time-stamped. And yet, something off. Beside him, Rook dozed in the window alcove, chin resting on the sill, but his ears kept twitching like antennae. Caleb's eyes drifted toward the fog outside, not really seeing it, but remembering. That old woman last year, Eunice Hargrove, found near the edge of the river trail, disoriented, after wandering too far from the community garden. Caleb had been first on scene. She kept muttering about the barn that sings at night. He'd dismissed it back then. Another elder lost to memory slip. But her file was in front of him now, and a post-it stuck to the corner, handwritten, fading. Complaint dismissed. D. Crane. The guilt swelled in his chest like something alive. He had let that go. And now a whole ring of silence and shadows had moved forward unchallenged, until a German shepherd had barked into the night and refused to stop. Rook stirred. On instinct, Caleb looked up. Across the street from his window, a county vehicle had pulled into the municipal lot. Not Delia's. This one bore the insignia of the Harlan County Infrastructure Oversight Office, not Blount. The driver stepped out, shook out her rain jacket. She was tall, with tight blonde curls pinned under a cap, clipboard in hand. She walked briskly, glanced once toward Caleb's window like she knew it was his. Something twisted in his gut. He called Mendez, asked her to check the name Delia Crane had used on her permitting submissions. An hour later, she texted back. Signature approvals cross-checked. None of the diagrams match Delia's handwriting. But they do match. Leanne Crane, younger sister, licensed structural engineer, currently stationed in Harlan County. Caleb felt his stomach drop. All this time, Delia had been the mouthpiece, the clean name. But the mind, the math, the design that came from someone who understood weight load, reinforcement, airflow regulation in subterranean cavities. This wasn't just corruption. It was engineering. And Leanne? She hadn't been in any database tied to the raid. Not yet. He pulled property logs from state infrastructure. There, buried in zoning addendums, an outparcel listed under L. Crane, zoned as agricultural utility storage, just 3 miles from the Maryville Industrial Park, where the white truck's GPS always went dead. Rook stood before Caleb even moved. He had felt the shift. Caleb grabbed his jacket, his badge, and quietly whispered, "We're not done." By late afternoon, Caleb and Mendez arrived at the outparcel. No marked house, just a sloped gravel drive disappearing behind high cedar fencing, thick with ivy and signs of recent tire tracks. The storm had softened the ground. Easy to miss, but the imprints were too narrow for agricultural trucks, more like vans. Mendez lifted her binoculars. Thermal shows one heat signature, small, not moving, might be a generator. They advanced slow, methodical. Caleb flanked left while Mendez circled the perimeter. Rook moved low to the ground, tail still, nose quivering. They reached the side of the structure, a concrete bunker retrofitted with wood paneling. A keypad by the entrance. Motion lights didn't trigger. Caleb knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. Then a voice, a woman's, filtered through a speaker above the door. Calm. Precise. "Detective Whitaker, I was wondering when you'd follow the trail properly." Mendez's eyes widened. Caleb stepped closer. voice flat. Leanne Crane, you're interfering in a federal investigation. No, she said. I'm correcting its blind spots. You built it, Caleb said. The tunnels, the chambers, the goddamn lift system under a food co-op. I optimized a system others were already exploiting. You think those crates were the start? I was trying to make it safer, cleaner, controlled passage. No one dies on my design. You're just like your sister. There was a pause. She wanted out, Leanne said softly. She started missing steps, slipping files, leaving fingerprints. I warned her. Caleb's heart pounded. Rook's posture stiffened. Then a soft, metallic click. The bunker door unlatched, slowly swung open. Inside, no people, no movement, only an architectural table. Blueprints. A laptop screen blinking code. And in the center of the concrete floor, a crate. Sealed, labeled, with air holes. The storm outside began again, wind hissing across the fencing like breath through teeth. Mendez drew her weapon. Caleb exhaled. This wasn't the end. It was the blueprint for a war quietly waged, where the lines between villain and engineer were drawn in shades of justification. And somewhere inside that bunker, the truth was still pulsing, still alive. The wind barreled down from the ridgeline like a train with no brakes, flattening grass and flinging debris against the bunker's steel siding. The moment the storm arrived, it didn't knock, it forced itself into every crevice. Caleb stood just inside the open doorway, rain starting to slice in sideways. He scanned the interior, eyes adjusting to the fluorescent hum and cold gray of poured concrete. The crate sat in the center like a question that had waited too long for an answer. Rook entered first, slow and methodical. His paws were near silent on the floor, but the tension in his frame spoke volumes. He circled the crate once, sniffed at the lower edges, then looked back at Caleb with a kind of restrained urgency, ears pinned slightly back, tail still. Not fear, not alarm. Something more subtle. An invitation. A call to pay attention. Mendez moved to cover the rear. We're blind on the southeast. That slope leads into the timberline. If she's still here, she's not, Caleb said, his voice low. She built this place to run, not to fight. He knelt by the crate. Plastic zip ties bound the front latches. Through the air holes came the unmistakable scent of antiseptic, plastic, and food. Dried food. Packaged. Stored. Not fresh. Not new. He cut the ties. Rook moved in closer but didn't bark, just pressed his head against Caleb's knee as he opened the lid. Inside were two children, one no older than 10, the other perhaps 14, curled together under a fleece throw. They blinked up in silence, pupils wide from the sudden light, pale, thin, silent. The older one had a bandage on her wrist, too clean to be recent. The younger held a small wooden toy with a broken wheel, clutched so tightly the knuckles had gone white. "We're safe," Caleb said, voice catching. "You're safe now." The girl nodded once. No tears. Just that solemn, heavy look only children who've had to survive alone can carry. Rook stepped forward, sniffed once, then lowered his head into the crate. Gentle, slow. The boy's hand reached out, shaking, and touched the dog's muzzle. That was the first sound, a single exhale from the boy, like letting go of a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for days. Outside, thunder cracked like the mountains were splitting open. Mendez called in coordinates. Backups were minutes out, but the storm was closing fast. As they began guiding the kids out, a low metallic groan reverberated through the floor. Not thunder. "Back wall," Caleb said sharply, motioning Mendez to take the kids toward the exit. Rook snapped alert, then surged toward the far side of the bunker, where a rust-streaked drainage grate had begun to tremble. The floor shifted again, only slightly, but enough for Caleb's instincts to flare. He grabbed the flashlight from his belt and swept the beam across the base of the wall. Then he saw it. A service tunnel, covered in false paneling. The kind Delia's sister would know how to hide in plain sight. The entrance was cracked open barely an inch, the air behind it cold and moving. "Tunnel's active. She's running." Mendez turned, ready to give chase, but Caleb shook his head. "We don't follow, not with the kids. The moment she ran, she made her choice." They exited into the storm with their arms full, Caleb carrying the older girl, Mendez shielding the boy. Rook led, body taut and alert, guiding them back up the slope. The moment their boots hit gravel, headlights cut through the rain. Agent Cole, arriving in a blacked-out SUV. He took one look, opened the doors, and swept the kids inside with military precision. As Caleb leaned against the fender, soaked through and hollowed out, Rook stood beside him, dripping and motionless. The dog looked toward the tree line where the tunnel might have emptied, then slowly sat. "You knew," Caleb said to him, not expecting a reply. "You heard what the rest of us didn't." Rook didn't move, but his presence grounded everything. In that silence, Caleb heard it again, the softest metallic clink. A bell, not close, not clear, but echoing faintly down the wind from somewhere behind the trees. The sound stopped him cold. It wasn't a warning, it was a memory. He turned to Agent Cole. "We need a team on the foothill side. That tunnel's got an exit, and it's ringing." Cole blinked. "Ringing?" "I'll explain later. Bring gloves." As the SUVs pulled out of the lot, the rain slowed for just a moment, tapering to mist. The kind that soaked slow, that made everything smell like pine sap and wet earth. Mendez rode up front. Caleb sat in the back with the children. Rook curled on the floorboards between their feet, his eyes heavy but alert, his ears twitching with each passing mile. No sirens, no chatter, just breathing. And for the first time in a long time, the rhythm of that breathing wasn't broken by regret. Not tonight. By early spring, the land where the barn once stood was nothing but leveled earth and black soil. The foundation stones had been carted away, not for disposal, but to be reused, stacked into the short perimeter wall of what would become the Townsend Community Garden. There was something symbolic about that. The ground had remembered, and now it would be asked to remember something new. A small cedar post stood near the entrance gate. Bolted to it was a bicycle bell, polished silver, slightly weathered by rain. The kind of bell a child might ring without thinking, just to hear the sound echo through the hills. Every so often, when the wind came down from Foothills Parkway just right, it struck the bell gently. Not loud, but enough for anyone nearby to look up from their work and smile. The children, Grace and Nolan, had been placed with a foster family in Maryville, one with a therapy dog and a backyard that caught morning sun. They hadn't spoken much those first few weeks, but when Caleb came to visit, they'd sit close to Rook, hands resting on his fur like he was something alive and ancient and safe. Grace had started sketching. Nolan, after weeks of silence, told a school counselor. He kept breathing slow, so I did too. He meant Rook. Purple Root was dismantled. Under federal oversight, the charity that once boasted spotless audits and photo ops was stripped of its transportation permits and placed under criminal investigation. Evelyn Pike resigned, claiming ignorance. Caleb didn't push further. Some people are complicit by turning away, others by never asking the second question. Delia Crane disappeared for 7 weeks. TBI eventually located her in a remote construction site outside Crossville, living under a false permit and operating machinery under a borrowed name. No shootout, no theatrics, just steel cuffs, paperwork, and a face that never flinched. Not even when Caleb showed up during booking. She said only one thing. "You should have stayed in fire service." He didn't answer. Some truths don't need rebuttal. Caleb returned to his rhythms slowly. The mornings were earlier now. The house by Little River had been bought by the county to convert into a trauma support unit for victims rescued from trafficking, something small, discreet, but constant. He moved into a cabin closer to Miller's Cove, overlooking old pasture land, where cows grazed lazily under skies wide enough to hold the weight of long silence. On weekends, he worked with a local therapy program, Victim Outreach and Canine Support Initiative, VOCSI. Rook was technically semi-retired, but he rode with Caleb to the shelter in Maryville every Friday. His presence didn't change. Still alert. Still listening to things humans didn't know how to name. But something had softened. He no longer snapped to attention when trains passed. He no longer paced during thunderstorms. When he sat beside a child, it was no longer out of duty. It was out of something else, something quieter. Caleb watched people in those rooms, the fragile ones, the ones trying not to fold under the memory of what had been done to them. And he began to understand that healing wasn't a sharp pivot. It was erosion. Slow, relentless. It carved new channels inside the wreckage. One afternoon, sitting on a bench outside the community garden, Caleb watched an older man kneel beside the cedar post and tap the bicycle bell. Just once. The sound was barely audible over the hum of bees and the rustle of leaves. The man stayed there for a long time after, his hands in his lap, staring at nothing. Caleb didn't interrupt. Rook lay by his feet, head resting on one paw, eyes half-lidded in the dappled light. The past didn't vanish. The wind still carried the scent of pine and rain and iron-rich earth. The memories still showed up in Caleb's sleep sometimes. The barn, the trap door, the thud of boots in the dark. But the weight had shifted. It no longer pulled him under. It grounded him. One morning in late April, he stood on the porch with a mug of hot coffee and watched the fog lift off the river like a secret being exhaled. Rook sat beside him, unmoving, as the first light sliced through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew, soft, almost tired. Rook's ears twitched. He tilted his head. Then, nothing. He didn't rise, didn't bark. Just let the sound pass through him like wind through long grass. And that, Caleb thought, was the final lesson. Sometimes, you don't have to fight the echoes. You just have to outlast them.